Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you this morning. Take your Bibles and open them up to 3 John. 3 John. That's that small little book hidden at the end of the New Testament. 3 John. Appreciate Eric for his prayer this morning, getting us started off on the right foot, and Phil for directing our minds towards the Lord's Supper. Appreciate Mike for his songs. He did ask me before he came up here for this last song, he said, "You're not preaching on hell, are you?" Before we sang the song, "I'm Going That Way." Kind of reminds me of that preacher that was preaching on alcohol one Sunday morning. He said, "We need to take all the whiskey and all the booze in this town and throw it in the river." And then the invitation song was, "Shall We Gather by the River?" So that kind of reminded me of that. 3 John. They say, if you ever figure out who they are, you can tell me. They say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Now, that may be true, but it's normally only true in the eye of the beholder. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. You and I know imitation because we see it in our world all the time. We see our children imitating us. We see animals that imitate each other. Imitation is really just a simple idea, isn't it? It's that we copy, we resemble, we impersonate, or we reflect someone or something. To imitate someone. That's what we're going to talk about this morning out of 3 John, and we're going to look at verse 11. To kind of further illustrate this idea of imitation, I'll tell you a story. When Morgan and I first got married, at some point in that first few months of marriage, she sent me to the grocery store with a list. There's a lot of stuff on that list, but one of the things that was on the list was vanilla. Now, I went into the grocery store, and probably like you, I found the vanilla section and was amazed at the variety of options that I had before me. Now, I noticed a lot of things. There were some really small bottles, and there were some really large bottles. And those bottles were all different shapes and sizes, but the weird thing about it was that the price didn't match the size of the bottle. There were some small bottles that were really expensive, especially if they had the word organic on it. And then there were some large bottles that were really cheap. And I couldn't put two and two together. So as a man, I found the biggest bottle for the least amount of money. I threw it in the cart and I took off. Now, when I got home, Morgan said, "This will work, but this isn't what I was looking for. I was looking for real vanilla." And I got a lesson. There are two types of vanilla out there, aren't there? There is what is pure vanilla extract. Now, that's that expensive bottle that's really small. And then there is what is called imitation vanilla. Now, why do they call it imitation vanilla? Because for all intents and purposes, imitation vanilla looks like real vanilla. Imitation vanilla smells like real vanilla. And, at least for my unsophisticated palate, imitation vanilla tastes like real vanilla. But it's not real vanilla, and that's why it's cheaper. But it's called an imitation. Why? Because it looks like, it tastes like, and it smells like the real thing. It's an imitation. It's a copy. It's a resemblance. It is an impersonation of the real thing. Now, imitation gets a bad rap in our society today because we, especially as Americans, love our originality. We want to be who we are, and I don't want to be like you, and I don't want to be labeled as you. I want to be who I am. But imitation doesn't discount originality. In fact, I would venture for you to think that you, just like I, am a sum total of all the influences I've ever had in my life. Every person I have ever met has had an impact on me and made me who I am. And that is either a good thing or a bad thing. All of us, if we are parents, can remember looking back at the way we were raised and said, "I liked that. I want to keep doing that as a parent. I didn't like that. I don't want to keep doing that as a parent." We are the sum total of our influences. 3 John is a book all about imitation. And we're going to get there. We're going to read it. So go ahead and have your Bibles open to it. It's a short book. 3 John is the fourth in a series of 5 different books that were written by the Apostle John. Now, John was probably the most broad and prolific writer in the New Testament because he wrote in so many different genres. He wrote a gospel about Jesus. He wrote 3 letters that we have here at the end of the New Testament, 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John. And then John wrote the book of Revelation. He wrote a lot of different things in the New Testament. 3 John is the third of a series of 3 letters that he wrote to what we believe to be a series of house churches. Now, 1 John's a little bit longer. It's 5 chapters, and in it you read about the doctrine of Christ, you read about how God is love, and how God wants us, when He comes back, to not be ashamed, but to have confidence at His appearing. 2nd and 3rd John are not broad letters. In fact, both of them are just one chapter, and they are written to specific people. 2nd John is written to a specific person. 3rd John is written to a specific person. We're going to read this letter. It's just 15 verses, it's real short. And we're going to see a verse in the middle of it that'll kind of context our lesson for this morning. 3rd John, a letter written to a certain individual. Let's look down in our Bibles together. Let's read these short 15 verses, and then we'll key in on verse 11. The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you, and that you may be in good health as it goes well with your soul. For I rejoiced greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, as indeed you are walking in the truth. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Beloved, it is a faithful thing that you do in all your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testify to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God. For they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers for the truth. I have written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So if I come, I'll bring up what he's doing, talking wicked nonsense against us, and not content with that, he refuses to welcome brothers and also stops those who want to. He puts them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. Whoever does good is from God. Whoever does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. We also add our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. I had much to write to you, but I'd rather not write with pen and ink. I hope to see you and we could talk face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends each by name. 3 John, 15 short verses, a letter written to a man by the name of Gaius. When you dive into this letter, you'll find that there are 3 main characters. The letter from John is written to a man by the name of Gaius. Gaius, as you saw his description here, is a man who's good. He's great, he's hospitable, he's faithful. It's talked about in the text that it seems like he's been hosting missionaries in his home. He's opened up his home to missionaries that Paul has sent. And John is writing to him saying, listen, Gaius, man, good job. I'm proud of you. You're keeping these people in your home. You're being hospitable. Keep on keeping on. You're doing the right thing. He mentions another person, as you can see in verse 9, by the name of Diotrephes. And John says in this letter, in the midst of telling Gaius, hey, listen, you're doing a good job. Keep up the good work. He says, listen, there's somebody in the church that I wrote a letter to the church, but this man, Diotrephes, he doesn't respect our authority. He doesn't believe we are who we say we are. And he is putting people out of the church because they want to support the missionaries I'm sending. In fact, it says there in verse 10, if I come, I'll bring up what he's doing because he's talking wicked nonsense against us. And not content with that, he refuses to welcome those brothers. The people Gaius was having into his home, Diotrephes was saying, no way, we're not having them here. And even the people that said, you know what, Diotrephes, we should let these people come. He says, because you're against me, you're out of the church. What a man. A problem causer. He loved to be important. And it says in this text that he loved to be in charge. He loved to put himself first. Brings up one more character in 3 John, a man by the name of Demetrius. Verse 12, he has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. And we add our testimony. You know that our testimony is true. Demetrius is a good man, a man who loved the truth. Now, why do I bring all this up? This morning it's very simple because I want to take your attention back to verse 11. In 3 John verse 11, in the midst of writing to Gaius saying, hey, listen, you're doing a good job having these people into your home. You keep on doing that. Don't listen to Diotrephes, but think about the good example of Demetrius. In verse 11, he tells Gaius, all right, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. Do not imitate evil, but imitate good. John's encouragement to Gaius, in essence, was, listen, don't be a Diotrephes. I want you to be a Demetrius. You're doing a good job, Gaius, but I want you to keep imitating that which is good. I don't want you to imitate evil. Who's the evil example in the letter? Well, it's Diotrephes. He's a man that loves to be first. He's a man that loves to be important. And he's a man that wants to be in charge. The good example is Demetrius, a man who loves the truth and a good man. So our question this morning is really, really simple. When it comes to imitation, what does that look like in your life? We're going to look at this from two perspectives. We're going to begin by looking from Gaius' perspective. Then we're going to end by looking from the perspective of Diotrephes and Demetrius. Let's talk about this first perspective here this morning. When we talk about putting ourselves in Gaius' shoes, all of us could say that we have our work and the thing that we're doing. You have a responsibility in the Lord's church. Now, in your responsibility, who is it that you look to as the example of who you want to become like? John's encouragement to Gaius was, I want you to imitate Demetrius, not Diotrephes. So if you're in the shoes of Gaius this morning, I want you to ask yourself, who is it that I am imitating? Now, Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 1 is really, really clear. It's the most simple verse in Paul's letter in Ephesians. He says in 5 and verse 1, be imitators of God as beloved children. Now, I already put the picture of the young boy that had shaving cream all over his face and his dad had shaving cream all... You've seen a child imitate a parent. You've seen a daddy walking through a field and that child will follow behind him and take every step they took. Stepping in the deprinted grass right behind daddy, right? Imitating as a child. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 1 says that you and I should imitate God as beloved children. Now the context of that's really awesome because if you look back in chapter 4, at the end of that chapter, he says God is a God that does not hold grudges. God forgives. One of the most detrimental things to our conscience is when someone does something that we don't like, that hurts us or offends us, and we spend the rest of our life living on the grudge we hold. That'll kill us as Christians. And Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 1 says, don't be like that. God is forgiving. Be imitators of God as beloved children. What a beautiful thing. How freeing would it be if every grudge I have ever had in my life, I laid that to the side and I just pressed forward to be an imitator of God and not of the world. I'll tell you what, that'd free us of a lot of frustration and past memories. Imitators of God. John chapter 13 and verse 15, Jesus, after he had taken that towel and wrapped it around his waist and stooped down and washed the feet of his disciples, he said in verse 15, I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. Jesus stands at our example as our example of service, to serve other people, to make my life dedicated to being a servant of all. I've heard Brother David Shannon say many times that in trying to remain humble in his life, he has repeated the phrase to himself, I am never too good to sweep the floors. I am never too good to sweep the floors. Jesus stands as that same example. A man who should not have had to serve anyone was a man that served everyone. John 13 and verse 15. Now, at this point in our imitation, who we're looking to imitate, all we've talked about is divine. We've talked about God. We've talked about Jesus, perfect beings who did it just right. However, you and I know that there are other people around us who are not perfect, godly, divine beings that we can imitate as well. That's where 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 1 comes in. You remember the verse. Paul says, be imitators of me as I imitate Christ. Just as you and I are looking to God and trying to imitate Him and follow His example, there is a cloud of witnesses around each one of us that we are imitating. But let me ask you a question. Who's in the crowd that surrounds you? Who's in the crowd that is around you? Because we can be very tempted. And there's a lot of things that could be in that crowd, right? Or the things we read and listen to can be in the crowd. The things we watch can be in the crowd. The people we keep company with can be in the crowd. Do the people that surround me as my cloud of witnesses, do they show me examples of what it means to follow God? The people that influence me the most, the media that influences me the most, the opinions that form me the most, are those people that are looking to God? Because here's the thing, if I surround myself with people that do not look to God, eventually I'm going to stop looking to God. Because I am the sum total of my influences. It's been put this way, I've told you before, my mother used to say to me, show me who your friends are, I'll show you who you are. I'll show you exactly what kind of person you are if you just show me your friends, right? And I think that's true. You show me your friends, I'll tell you what kind of person you are. Another person put it this way, our friendships determine the direction and quality of our life. I think that's true. The people that we surround ourselves with lead us to who we will be in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So, I know that we're all to imitate God. I think probably if I took a poll, everybody would agree with that in this room. But we're not just imitating God in this world, we're imitating other people. Are those people imitating God? Paul said, be imitators of me as I imitate Christ. Who am I following that is following Christ? I think that's a valuable question to consider. He says in Hebrews chapter 6, verses 11 and 12, that you and I need to be imitators of the people who are patient and they endured and they weren't spiritually lazy and became spiritual babes when they should have been spiritually grown. You and I should imitate people who have grown spiritually. I think that's a pretty obvious statement, but one that we need to ponder. The people that I imitate, I need to be able to look at their life and say, you know, they got stronger as a Christian over the last year. I see a notable difference in their life. They're stronger followers of God. Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 7 says we need to follow the example of our leaders. Now, the verse is not up there, but kind of in tandem with that is 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 16, where Paul says, all right, Corinthian church, you've had a lot of people that have talked to you about God. You better be careful who you're actually listening to. You can listen to me because I'm following God, but you shouldn't listen to every person that talks to you about God. And in the English Standard, he uses the word counselors for God. You've had a lot of counselors for God. Be careful which ones you listen to. All right. That's the first point. Who are we imitating? If I'm going to put myself in the shoes of Gaius, who am I imitating? Second, who is imitating me? That should say, who is imitating me? Who are we imitating? That's the same thing it said before. Should have changed that. Who is imitating me? You just use your imagination and pretend that's what it says. Who is imitating me? Just as I am imitating others, you better take it to the bank and cash that check that there are other people looking up to you. And I don't care what age you are. I think maybe, we'd probably say like, maybe the ones that are like below 2, maybe we could classify that they may not have anybody looking up to them. But they may, I don't know. But really, you get above 2 years old, and in a congregation, you've got stair-stepped children that are looking up to the age above them, then they're looking up to the age above them, and then they're looking up to the age above them. It's a chain. Doesn't matter how young you are. You could be 10 years old. You've got somebody looking up to you in this congregation. Doesn't matter if you're 100 years old. You got somebody looking up to you in this congregation. Regardless of our age, people watch us. And they're imitating us. It's 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verses 7 and 9, that Paul says, when we were among you, we were not lazy. We wanted to set an example for you so that you would know it's not acceptable to be idle and lazy. I think that's a real direct idea from Paul. It's unacceptable to be idle and lazy. How did those Christians know that that was unacceptable? Because the leaders that they looked up to said, we're not even going to be close to idle and lazy. We're going to work hard every day. 2 Thessalonians 3, 7 and 9. An interesting question. I've preached this here before, but I think it's a mantra we should all repeat to ourselves. If everybody in the church was just like me, what kind of church would this church be? If you were to look around and see people that matched you, all in this congregation, what kind of church would this be? Would it be an apathetic church, a lazy church? Would it be a hard-working church? Would it be a church that grew spiritually? Would it be a church that pushed off the needs of others as if they're unimportant? What kind of church would this church be if everybody was just like me? Titus chapter 2, verses 1 through 5 says that's how maturity happens. The older generation sets an example for the younger generation. Therefore, the younger generation grows up with that example, and they set that same example for the next younger generation. And that teaching is cyclical. It happens over and over and over again. Where should you and I look for guidance and instruction? Christians that are older than us. And I presented the idea to you not long ago that the church should be filled with a group of wise, and we use the word sages. That's one way that the Proverbs are translated in one of the translations, that people with wisdom are sages, that the church should be filled with people like that. 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12, we kind of already covered this, but Paul said to Timothy, don't let any man despise you for your youth, but be an example to the believers. Doesn't matter how old or young you are, you can be an example to the leaders and the people around you. In Philippians chapter 4 and verse 9, you need to take the example of other people and practice it. This morning's lesson is not meant to be groundbreaking. I don't really expect to have shared anything this morning that you don't know. But I want to share something with you that I hope you'll think about. All of us imitate someone, and all of us are being imitated. What kind of example am I setting, and what kind of example am I following? Because you and I are the sum of our influences. And the beautiful thing is that you have control over who influences you. Who are you imitating? And what are you showing those who imitate you? Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Christ was not only one who served, but one who submitted to the will of God. Have you submitted to the will of God today? You've got a room full of witnesses who have done that. Maybe you need to look to their example as to be someone who submits to God's will. Maybe the case is that you've not set a good example for other people by the way you've lived, and you want to say, you know what, from here on out, I'm going to set that example. I don't want to be a Diotrephes. I don't want to be a problem causer. I want to be a Demetrius. I want to be a Gaius. I want to look up to godly people. I want to be a godly person other people can look up to. Who is following you? Maybe your example this morning of repenting of a sin or turning back to God is just the example somebody else needs to have the courage to come to God. Whatever the case is, if you have a need this morning, we're going to sing an invitation song. You're welcome to come forward to the front pews, and we'll take that need as together we stand and sing.